Hey everyone, I'm the Saxophone Oracle. This week I'm doing something a little different. I'm bringing you my first ever interview. Interviewing other saxophone players is something I've been meaning to do for a long time. Not long ago, maybe a few weeks, a month ago, a video showed up on the internet of the great Hank Mobley playing. And this caused a bit of a stir in the jazz world, in the saxophone world, because up until very recently there was no known footage of Hank Mobley. I saw this, I got excited about it, and I looked at who posted it, and sure enough, it was someone I knew. So I immediately reached out to him and said, can we talk about this video, and can we talk about saxophone education, the music business, and all kinds of things. So I'm really happy with how this interview turned out. It's a very long form interview. I'll post shorter clips of it as we go, but I hope you enjoy. This is Vancouver Canada based saxophonist Cory Weeds, who also ran a very successful jazz club for several years. He runs a fantastic record label in Vancouver. He's an impresario. He's Mr. Everything Jazz. I hope you enjoy. Cory Weeds, Vancouver, Canada, saxophonist extraordinaire. I know who you are, obviously. I hear you all over the radio. You do a lot of things. I don't think we've met personally, but we've spoken on the phone a few times. So first, I want to start by thanking you for doing this and welcoming you to the...
My pleasure. I'm happy to be asked.
Awesome. So to start out, Cory Weeds, the saxophone player, you have, as I understand it, over 19 albums under your own name. So we're not talking about sideman stuff and all that, but you have 19 or more Cory Weeds records.
Yeah.
You owned a very successful jazz club for about 15 years out in Vancouver. You have a record label, Cellar Music Group, over 160 CDs and counting.
No more, 300, over 300 now.
All right,
I think I updated my bio. You probably took that from my bio, and I realized how out of date that was. Yeah, we're up. I think we're up over 325 now, actually.
My God, so double that. So over 325 and counting. Okay, so you book bands. You book at Frankie's Jazz Club. You used to book the Cellar. You have this art center in Burnaby that you're doing as well.
Yep.
You're always bringing in American and international musicians to Vancouver to play.
Yep.
You have a radio show, Condition online.
Correct.
Okay, so you're doing that as well. And you organize this sort of jazz pilgrimage to New York every year where people follow you and you introduce them to the clubs and tour guide and the musicians. And so when I see all of these things that you do, and there's probably more that I'm not even thinking about, clearly your love for saxophone and for jazz runs deeper than most anyone, probably more than me, that's for sure. So I'm interested. Tell me about little Cory Weeds. What is it that got you into playing saxophone? What is it that got you to fall in love with music and set you off on this trajectory of all this stuff?
It's I mean, it's a good question. I like the way you posed it. So little Cory Weeds, there was music in my house all the time. I begrudgingly took piano lessons. My parents forced me to take piano, and there was always music in my house. I don't remember it specifically being jazz, but it was a lot of jazz. My dad is an amateur guitar player.
Okay.
I wanted to be an athlete. All my friends were athletes, and I wanted to be an athlete, but it was very clear that's not what was gonna, not get me through high school and certainly not get me through college. So I was taking piano lessons and doing my thing. I had a cousin, oddly enough, that lived in Port Alberni, who was a few years older than me, who I really idolized a lot. And he played saxophone, and I just thought he was the coolest guy ever. And so that's kind of where the impetus behind sort of playing saxophone kind of came from. I was playing piano, and there's jazz in the house. That kind of grouped in with my cousin. I was in high school band. I was taking some private lessons, and it started to happen in my later high school years where I got really interested, and I kind of came at it, in around grade 10, listening to more contemporary music, like, or contemporary saxophones like David Sanborn and, I might have to ask you to edit this out, but even Kenny
Yeah.
G for that matter, like anything that was sort of poppy and contemporary, I really kind of liked. In grade 11, when I went to high school, I was at a very sports centric school, and although I loved my band teacher, it was quite clear that she wasn't going to set me on the next path forward, you know. Um, Oddly enough, I was playing baseball in Burnaby, where I grew up, and my baseball coach was a band teacher at a high school called Vancouver Tech. And he asked me to come there. One thing led to another. I switched schools my graduating year, and that's where things sort of really took off for me because I had somebody other than my father telling me about all this hip music. You know, I was still in that. I mean, I was a pretty mature kid, but I was still rebelling against my father and my family. But I went to this high school and they were like, you got to check out Miles Davis, you got to check out Paul Desmond, you got to check out Cannonball Adderley. Like all this stuff was kind of coming at me, and I already had it at home. You know, especially guitar players because that's what my dad played. So like Wes Montgomery, and so all of it kind of came together at that point. And then of course I had to start thinking like, what the hell am I going to do after I graduate? So, you know, I was going to go to business school, which in hindsight might have been the better decision, you know, given what happened. But my dad was like, no, if you go to music school, I'll help you with your first year. If you go to business school, you're on your own, which is the complete opposite of the way most parents operate.
No kidding.
So, you know, if you ask me where my love of this music started, it was my dad. And then, you know, and then I got into college and, you know, the rest is, you know, I have a long history as you alluded to, but that's what was going on for me. I'm not even sure that even in my first year college, I was like, you know, I don't think I've ever had this burning desire to move to New York and try to turn the world on their ear and become the greatest saxophone player ever. Um, I just love the music, and I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be involved in this music in some way. And I think back then I thought about it only as a player, but now that I think back, I think in the back of my mind, I thought I don't care what I'm doing as long as I'm involved in the music. And you know, a lot of people like they read my bio and they see everything that I do and they're like, "Wow, you must have been like really driven when you were young and knowing exactly what you wanted to do." And it's the complete opposite. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but a lot of things and opportunities just came my way by virtue of what I was doing, who I was involved with, and my personality. So, you know, for example, you know, I have an entrepreneurial spirit. So that served me very well. You know, how can I make money at this? How can I make this into a job? How can I turn this into something that's more than just a love, you know?
Mhm.
And so all of the things that you listed off that I've done have just been as a result of something else. You know, I never set out to have a record label. I never set out to own a jazz club. I never set out to take people to New York. I never set out to do a radio show. That's not what I did. It just happened by virtue of everything that I was doing. And I'm the kind of guy that when an opportunity presents itself, I don't want to be 70 looking back on my life going, wow, like I really chickened out of those opportunities. You know, when you talk about my discography, I kind of chuckle because, you know, there are musicians who are 10 times better than me that have only put out 5 CDs. You know, why do I have a discography that's 20 CDs long? And the reason is because I just got a lot of opportunities and I worked hard to create those opportunities, but they were just opportunities that presented themselves. And like I said, I didn't want to be 70 going, oh, I wish I did that record with David Hazeltine, or I wish I did that record with Lewis Nash, but I chickened out and said no. Or, you know, so, you know, I look back on my life now and I'm almost 50. I'm like, damn, you know, I've kind of done everything I wanted
Yeah.
to do. Like, what's next, you know? So that's sort of in a nutshell, you know, how from little Corey to big Corey. Um, you know, there was a lot of stuff that happened in between there, a lot of ups and downs, but I mean, that's basically it. I love the music. I've always loved the music, and my mantra to myself has been don't ever let the perils of being in this business make you a dark and bitter person in that way.
Mhm.
Um, and that's why I closed the Cellar in 2014 because I wasn't enjoying the music anymore. running a restaurant and a bar was really hard. I had two young kids. It felt like it was taking years off my life. And I turned to my wife one day and I said, the music is no fun anymore. I don't want to go hear the music. I don't care about it. I'm done. And we agreed then it was time for me to get out. And it was the smartest decision I ever made. So, and I've managed to maintain my love of the music and my care for the musicians that make it, and that's taken me a long way. So that's a long answer to your question, but there it is.
Well, then, no, it's a great answer, and I mean, it's quite impressive. I mean, there is something special about you, though, that you do take those opportunities. Because I know many musicians who, yeah, they would shy away from things, and you have that, at least the willingness to try and then see where it takes you, and then it's clearly taking you places, and to be self-aware enough that, okay, the jazz club isn't working out, then
Yeah.
I don't like the music anymore, so we'll get rid of that, and then you continue to prosper
Yeah.
prosper in that
Yeah.
industry. So I
Yeah. It
mean,
was scary at first, but I managed to get through. So.
that's amazing. Thank you. No, that's beautiful. Do you mind, because you have this plethora of things that you do, if I ask you a couple questions before, because I want to talk to you about reel to reel,
Yep.
but do you mind if I ask you a couple of business questions?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So in my 25 years or so involved in music, I've noticed, right, between musicians, they tend to have sort of like their hackles up, or an adversarial sort of relationship to the business side of the industry, right? And this goes back forever, whether it's labels cheating musicians out of stuff, managers robbing artists blind, club owners stiffing people, whatever it is. um, you know but it seems to me like over the years it's getting harder and harder to make a living simply as a musician. You have to be a lot more creative, and be willing to do all kinds of different things. And with jazz education flourishing the way it has over 40 years, you're getting more and more players coming out of these schools who are really competent. Sure, not
Yep.
everyone's going to be a star, but they're all quite competent. And
Yep.
one thing the schools don't really teach for the most part is the business side,
Yeah.
what you're gonna do when you get out of school. And I'm always joking, like we just celebrated the 60th anniversary of the $100 gig.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
the pay is the same kind of thing. So I think you have such a unique perspective, more than like anyone I could possibly think of, because you wear all these hats. I mean, you are the artist, and so you know what it is to be in their shoe. And then you're also the big bad guy who like holds the purse strings, because you have a record company, you were the club guy,
Yeah.
you're the booking guy. So how do you view sort of these roles? How do you approach them yourself? And I'm curious, what do you think, like all of these separate actors in the industry should know about one another in order to get along, everyone be happy, everyone sort of producing what they want? Does that make any sense, the question?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, yeah, when you allude to we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the $100 gig, the system has been broken since its inception.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't think the system has ever been right. So, I used to say, "Oh, I was born in the wrong era." You know, um, Hank Mobley died poor and penniless.
Yeah.
I mean, this is my favorite saxophone player. You look at my record collection behind me, half of them are Hank Mobley records. I mean, and he died broke and penniless. So the system has been broken since its inception.
Hmm.
I think that musicians also are a lot to blame. Musicians are not very empowered a lot of times and need to be more empowered. They need to learn more. I think back in the day, well, actually, not even back in the day. You have people back in the day who just focused on playing saxophone, and um, that's it. And look where they ended up. Whereas you take somebody like Benny Golson, who started a publishing company
Yeah.
and got that kind of stuff together. So and Benny Golson, I would never. Benny Golson's amazing, but I don't think he was the greatest saxophone player out of all the tenor players that were around at his time. But he was smart,
Hmm.
and sadly, not a lot of musicians have that ability. So I'm lucky. I have an entrepreneurial spirit. I'm relatively intelligent. I'm good with people.
Hmm.
I'm a decent musician and a good saxophone player. I don't think I excel at one thing. What I excel at is having a lot of things together rather than just being like just an incredible saxophone player that practiced 10 hours a day and didn't care about anything else. So in this day, it's even more important to um, be as what's the word, diverse, but to be open-minded and diverse as possible. I struggle every day with the musician hat versus the presenter hat. Especially now, I think in some ways it's gotten worse because as I go through my career and as my reputation continues to grow and solidify, I get higher profile gigs, whether they be playing gigs or booking gigs. So I have to sit here and go, well, wait a minute. I've got to sit in front of my computer for 3 hours dealing with this person and getting all the details together. Like, yeah, I should be making $500 and the other guy should be making three. That's
Hmm.
okay. So juggling what's fair to pay a musician versus what's not, when you're taking too much, when you're not taking enough, like all that stuff is happening all the time. I think one of the things that I really wish could happen, and I think the ship has probably sailed, but we had and have an AFM, an American Federation of Musicians. We have locals. The problem is those locals were never geared towards helping the freelance musician.
Yeah, yeah.
Never. It was always about classical musicians, the show musicians, and I don't want to talk about the union's model. I'm not slagging the union, but you probably don't know this. When I closed the club, I got hired as the president of the Vancouver Association, and I
Oh, really?
lasted one day. I got fired, but I didn't get fired because I did a bad job. I got fired because we got caught up in this crazy court case that we don't need to talk about. But the point being is my first order of business there was going to be, okay, I have a voice in Vancouver. People know who I am.
Hmm.
Let's get the musicians together. Let's get the venues together. Let's get some stakeholders together. And let's talk about what we can do to at least make it better. I think the whole idea of making a living as a jazz musician, that ship sailed long ago. I
Hmm.
don't think it has anything to do with the rising real estate, the inflation. Making it as a saxophone player 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago wasn't much easier than it is today. So I do, and I don't have the, what's the word? I was going to say I'm not smart enough, but that's not fair. I don't have the information at my fingertips, or I'm not articulate enough on the subject to explain why. But rising real estate and cost of living is not to blame for not being able to make a living as a musician. Because as I said, it was just as hard 10 years ago when I could have bought a house for half as much as I bought mine for 15 years ago, 20 years ago. There weren't more places to play. Maybe there was more CBC work, maybe
Sure.
if you were in, so I think a lot of it has to do with musicians being organized. And the problem is there's no one of the problems is there's no standard. So like my wife is a school teacher. She can't go to another school and say, "Oh, hey, I'll teach grade 4 and 5 for you for
Yeah, 20
five
bucks
thousand
less.
for 20." I mean, you can't do it. And
Yeah.
it's not possible in almost any profession like that. I mean, I guess it, like in the States you have doctors that, oh, well, I'll just go to the guy next door, but I mean, with musicians, there's always somebody younger, um, willing to undercut you. There's also no degree to being a musician. And I
Mhm.
don't want to disparage anybody who wants to play and perform, but like I've been doing this my whole life, and somebody walks into a restaurant, gets a gig, can't play, the club is packed, the owner's like, "Oh, this is
Yeah.
amazing." It's like, but wait a minute, like I've been
Yeah.
doing this my whole life, and I'm at a much, so it's about musicians, I think, being organized.
Mhm.
within the musician community, it's about them trying to branch out. It's about teaching these kids in school about branching out and learning more about the business. But I mean, the bigger thing, part of your question is like, I mean, I struggle with that, straddling that line every day. And I'm not going to lie to you. Sometimes I don't do a very good job. Like sometimes I take a gig because I'm a musician first. And
Yeah.
as a musician like you understand, like we were taught to never say no to a gig. Like you don't say no.
Mhm.
You should be grateful for a gig. So like I'll get a gig for $200 and I'll go to this gig. I'm like, why am I here? Like I don't need this money. And this gig is horrible for a number of like,
Mhm.
so I'm always working with myself, like how much do I pay people, how much do I take for myself, what's fair, am I paying myself too much, what does it mean to pay myself too much, should I take a leader's fee? Sometimes I have to pull favors. Sometimes I have to say, hey Brad Turner, can you transcribe this chart for this gig? The gig pays okay, but I don't have any extra money to pay you for the chart.
Yeah.
But the difference with me is that I have a track record, and people who deal with me generally know or generally feel, I hope, that Corey's in this for the long term. So if I do this solid for him now, it's going to come out on the other end. Somebody else um, might not have that benefit.
Credibility, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I think, and this is again, sometimes with young musicians or musicians who don't do as well as I do or as well as other musicians, sometimes they get offended by this. So I don't mean this in an offensive way at all. But musicians are notorious scufflers, first of
Yep.
all, and they look gig to gig. They look, everything is like, and I've never ever looked like that. I've always looked at what is the whole thing. And the example I use is I was lucky enough to do a record with Joey DiFrancesco. It was
Yep.
one of the highlights of my career, and his passing has been very hard to kind of get around. But in any event, I got a chance to make a record with him. I paid him a wheelbarrow full of money. And if you did the math, you'd be like, how could Corey do that and actually even come close to breaking even?
Mhm.
And the problem is that I don't look at it like that. I look at it like, okay, it gave me 3 gigs at the club that I got paid for. I
Mhm.
got a record. I sold a record. I got another tour with, I got another gig, high profile gig with Joey that paid some money. I sold some product. It led to this interview, and it led to Joey coming back when I closed my club, um, in 2014, and I got to play with him 3 more nights. It's
Mhm.
all in there. It's not about like, well, I paid $10,000 for this CD, therefore I need to sell 1,000 at
Yeah.
10. No, it's not. You can't think like that. Otherwise, you'll go crazy. So you have to think like long term about what your plan is for your career. And what my plan was is that I want to have a house. I want to have a car. I want to get married. I want to have kids. And so therefore, I need to make sure I'm bringing in more money than I'm paying out.
Mhm.
So I went and did that within the music business. Now, I'm not suggesting it was easy. I had a lot of help. I had a lot of investors. I had a lot of support. I worked hard to get all those things, but that's to me where it starts. As soon as you get into this narrow thing about, and I understand, like when you're young, you have rent to pay. All you can think about is like, I got to pay rent, I got to eat. I'm not suggesting that's not the case. But when you sort of start to establish your career, I think you need to widen your scope of what you're trying to accomplish. And I always knew what I wanted to accomplish. I never went into that particular recording going, oh my God, like I need to sell this many to make this much. It was never about that. So I guess the short answer to your question is I think that musicians really work against themselves, and they're constantly stepping on their own feet. I see it happen all the time. And when I can step in, I try to step in and say, hey, like, you know, I do think there needs to be more of a focus in the schools on, and this is going to sound very self serving, but I personally think I should be, in from September to November and then February to April, I should just be touring back and forth across Canada and even in the
Yeah.
States, giving these talks saying like, because I've made every mistake in the book. So, so anyways, that's a very long-winded answer, but
Yeah, well,
Um,
I mean, that would be a great public service to Canadian
you,
jazz students if
I
that could
have
happen.
I have thought about trying. I have done those clinics, and I've thought about trying to do it. But again, for me, I got two young kids and a wife that
Yeah,
works full time, so it's not that it's a big deal for me just to go out of town to do a gig. So
yeah,
there's those things. But again, that falls into like what can I do or not do. So I sometimes I think that young musicians have this thing like they're gonna go to school, they're going to practice 8 hours a day. They're going to get really good, and then their phone is going to just start ringing off
ring,
the
yeah,
hook. And it just doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that.
yeah.
So yeah,
It's true. That's true. I I like that. Good words of advice there. Um, I really would like to see you though going around giving a clinic at every university.
it's
They need it desperately.
I've really enjoyed doing it when I've been given the opportunity, and I've done it everywhere. I've done it in Toronto, Montreal, and I've done it in Philadelphia, and I've done it a lot of places, and it's really fun. I'm doing it in Pittsburgh in November, and it's great because I learn a lot too. But you
Sure.
just see these kids like they're ready, like, okay, what do you think of streaming? Like streaming is horrible and how can we stop it? I'm like, well,
Well, you got to.
maybe you should think about streaming a little bit differently because I think streaming they're all crooks,
Yeah.
but I'm generating a significant amount of revenue from my releases on streaming. So,
Well,
I mean,
that's a perfect segue to my next question, though, because this will be the last of the business questions. But okay, the record business, the way it was when we grew up as kids, that's
mhm,
that's non-existent. And over the last
yeah,
25 years, it's just the landscape has changed. As you said, everything is streaming. People aren't, even the big artists like Wynton Marsalis and them, they're not making money off of selling records, right?
nope,
Um, so there is that, and for better or for worse, it's like you say, maybe you got to look at it a different way because there are some great things about it and there are some terrible things about it, you
yeah,
know. But for musicians, of course, musicians are always going to want to be producing and be heard and putting things out.
yeah,
But I find it's a little bit of a catch-22 happening this day and age because in order to book a tour, if you want to go to the jazz festivals or you want to go and tour a bunch of clubs and everything, you need to have a CD and it's got to be a fresh CD, right? Even if you go out, you tear it up, it's time for festival season next year, well, what's new? What do you have?
yeah,
Otherwise, you know, so, and that's quite the expense and never mind the artistic investment to come up with material for a whole new record every year and the expense. Sure, recording costs have come down with technology and stuff like that. In Canada, we have a lot of government funding and stuff for, I have my own opinions about that too, but we
yeah,
got the arts councils, we have Factor, all kinds of things like that. But you know, artists have to put out these records in order to get heard, in order to get booked, but it's no longer a revenue stream selling records. So my question to you, since you're an artist and you have a label, where do you see the record industry going at
yeah.
present? Do you see if there's any way that artists can find a way back to making some kind of money off of selling records? And thirdly, what do you think is the role of a record company nowadays, seeing as the records aren't selling themselves?
Wow,
What is the job, you know?
you're going deep there.
Well, I'm with the guru.
I
So
tend I tend to talk too long, so I'll try to make this more concise. So first of all, I think for the first, I'm not disagreeing with what you said necessarily, but I think there is a mistake when you completely, and I'm not saying you did this, but when you completely disregard physical sales. Physical
okay,
sales is still a very big part of my business,
okay,
both via distribution, via stage sales, via artist sales, which are essentially the same thing.
yeah, stage sales, yeah,
So if you take, for example, if you come to any one of my gigs here in Vancouver, you take a look around at my audience and you'll see the average age is 50 and above.
yeah,
Those people are buying CDs.
sure,
Now you look at another band, like actually, I'll use this. I'll use this as an example, back because I Spike Wilner is a dear friend of mine, and we talk
yeah,
a lot. And
Smalls, right?
yeah, Spike said something very interesting to me. He had a label for some time called Smalls Live, and he said, "Corey, I can't sell a CD to save my life at my club." And I look, I'm like, really? And I've been to smalls like dozens and dozens of times. And it's like the average audience in there is 20 to 25 years old. They don't even know what a CD is.
Yeah.
You go uptown to Smoke or Jazz at Lincoln Center or some of those types of clubs, and the average audience is older. So it's about musicians knowing their audience. Now, do I think you should press 3,000? No, of course not. I mean, we're either pressing 500 or 1,000. So again, and the industry is behind, radio is behind, press still wants physical copies, radio still wants physical copies, even though they just immediately download them
Digitize it.
into their, digitize it. So there's some things to kind of manage there. So then you have the streaming aspect. Now I'm lucky because even though I'm a small, I mean I'm not small in numbers, but I'm small. I'm a small independent label. So I have a bit of a machine behind me. Um, but I mean, I'll give you an example. Like I don't have one record of my own in the last four records that's generated less than $5,000 US in streaming.
Okay.
Now, the reason I say that is not so everybody thinks I'm special. I mean, I don't want to say nobody knows who I am, but I'm not Wynton Marsalis. I'm not, to use Canada, like I'm not PJ Perry. I'm not Kirk McDonald. I'm not Pat LaBarbera. Uh, I'm not Wynton Marsalis. I'm not Chris Potter. I'm not any of those people. But I've got a track record. I've put out a lot of stuff. I've got the label. You can do it. You just have to involve the right people. So I have a very small team that I work with, a distributor in New York called La Reserve. They have a record label, but they work for the Orchard. And they do all my streaming stuff. And I've managed to be able to generate some revenue from that. So and I always say that if musicians spent as much time working on their career as they did about bitching about all the problems,
Yes. You're preaching to the
then
choir,
then why don't you stop bitching and actually start putting some of that angry energy into advancing your career, and then maybe you'd have something. And look, man, people think, oh, you had investors, and you're 50 now, and you have money, and you book Frankie's, and they pay. Look, I've made so many mistakes and taken so many risks when I didn't have the financial backing. And that's just the way it is. You win some and you lose some. And back to what we talked about earlier, at the end of the day, hopefully you're winning more than you're losing. And if that's not the case, then I would have got a job at Staples or something else, but I'm winning more than I'm losing. So, but that doesn't mean I haven't lost. So I think if you think, oh, forget physical, I'm just going to go all digital. I'm like, okay, well, what's your strategy? Because it's the same difference. Just because your stuff is on the internet doesn't mean people are going to listen to it. The same way, just because you show up with CDs, it doesn't mean that 40 people are going to line up and buy your CDs. So there has to be a strategy behind everything you do: gigging, releasing records, how you release them, where you release them, when you release them, all those kinds of things. Do you do radio? Do you not do radio? Do you do press? Do you not do press? Well, does your record have a chordal instrument on it? No. Well, guess what? Radio's not going to like it.
Yeah.
Do you have a special guest on your record? Oh, okay, maybe you should do press. Oh, you're having an organ record. Oh, well, so and so just released an organ record that's charting really well. The radio people don't like too many organ records. They can have 50 saxophone records, but organ is like a novelty instrument. So you can only have two or three of those being played at the same time, which is stupid, but whatever. So there's all these things that you need to think about. So that's the one. As far as what a label can do for you, it depends, because there's all kinds of different types of labels, and I embody every type of label in one label. So I have records that I personally, oh, not personally, but that the label pays to make. So, like the heavy hitters with Mike Ledon. Well, actually, that's a bad example. This one's a better example. Scott Hamilton. Where am I?
Oh,
Where
yeah.
am I going there? Right,
There you
Scott
go.
Hamilton. That's mine. So that record cost the label $10,000. I put the money into it. I put it out. Operated like a standard record label. Then we have, and sometimes in those records I can get some private financing. I didn't for this one, but then I'm also in the comprehensive music business funding program at Factor. So I get a lot of money from Factor. So that's how, I don't have any of them sitting here, right? Oh yeah, that's how That's how this comes out. That's how I'm able to get Lewis Nash and Rini Rosnes. And now that doesn't mean that, Factor just does it all. I still have to come up with half the money. So, I search for private investment. If I feel it's a record that I can make my money back on, then I'll put up the money. And then the third way is, I get a thing in the mail, record in the mail that I really like, or a master in the that I really like with Terrell Stafford, and I'm like, yeah, I'll put that out, but you got to pay for everything.
Sure, yeah.
So in all of those things, well, what does a record label do? If you put a record out under me through Factor and you're Canadian, you get access to a lot of money that you otherwise wouldn't have. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing, if you're going on tour, I'll help you. I'll help you get some gigs because it's in my best. I want you to sell CDs. So I want you to buy 400 CDs off me and sell them. You're going to make money. I'm going to be happy. So I'll help you with some touring stuff. I'm not going to be your touring agent, but I'll help you get some gigs. I'll bring you to Vancouver. Mm-hmm. We can do some advertising. I get good rates at, all the magazines because I'm a label and I have distribution. So we can work a deal like that way. And in streaming, it helps because now all of the digital service providers like, Cellar Music, we know it's going to be good because everything they put out is good. So top of the pile, whereas some dude just doing it on his own, sending it through some means like, I don't really know this guy and it's a new label. Let's see what else is up here. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the roles, but I mean, simply speaking, the role now I think of a label is just a portal in which to get it out. Now there's some labels that operate like Smoke Jazz, which is one of my favorites. They're a traditional record label. They only put out one a month, maybe two. They pay everything, and it's like a business model for them. Okay. I don't know how they do it, but it's a business model for them. And then you have like Positone, who doesn't pay anybody. So, and the other thing that people don't realize about me is that I have my Frankie's gig, which I book, that pays me well, and I have my playing. Those are the two things. That's how I feed my family. The label is just fun. So I never, ever go into my label account and write Cory Weeds a check for $2,000 because I need the money. I just leave it in there. And I put out more records. So if I look at the bank account, there's $30,000 in there. I'm like, okay, I probably can make a record. And then I remember, I'm going to owe all this money. And, that's how my label operates. I'm not using it. It generates a lot of income, but I don't personally take it out. It generates a lot of income. I put it back in. Yeah. So that's a rare thing too, that not a lot of people have that. Like a lot of people that own record labels, that's their gig. Yeah. And that to me is very scary. Very, very scary. I would never do it. So, we've amassed a very large catalog that hopefully one day will be worth a lot of money. I don't know, but but I'm always I'm thinking about this shit all the time. Like, like you see my big wall of CDs here, like, am I going to be left with all of these? Like, should I recycle them? Like, what should I do? And so every year I go through my inventory and I recycle a bunch of CDs because a lot of them reach their shelf life, and I send them to radio stations. So I'll email the Canadian radio station, says, send me $25 for shipping and I'll send you 100 CDs that you can give away on your shows, just get it out there. So, so that's the kind of, that's the quick and dirty on that.
No, that's amazing. I'm so happy to get that insight. I think it's really interesting, and people don't get that behind the scenes look, So okay, so now I want to move on to some stuff that I'm really interested in, and the reason why I really wanted to talk to you. You have As part of the Cellar Music Group, you have Cellar Live where you do your live recordings. You have the Cellar Music, which is the studio album stuff, and then fairly recently you have Reel to Reel, right?
Excuse me.
REEL to REAL.
Correct.
And if I'm understanding correctly from what I've checked out, is like you're kind of playing the role of jazz hunter, jazz archaeologist. Like you're looking and finding unreleased material that's sitting God knows where
Yep.
and putting it out. And you're not doing this on like you're not playing a little league here, right? Like you got
Yeah.
Cannonball in Seattle, you got a Etta Jones record. I see you have Johnny Griffin and Lockjaw. You got a George
Yeah.
Coleman record, Harold Land, Pepper Adams. Like this is
Yep.
amazing stuff. So
Yep.
my question is, how did you get involved in this? How did this become part of
Sure.
your wheelhouse?
Yeah. So, it actually, there was a lot of stuff that came up several years ago. About there being some tapes in Vancouver. So it was always kind of in the back of my mind. However, um, it really happened through Facebook connection with Zev Feldman, who's widely known as the jazz detective.
Okay.
We started up a friendship on Facebook. We started talking, and I had an idea when I was working at Coastal, the jazz festival people, of bringing Zev to town for 5 nights and featuring a tribute night for each one of his 5 releases. So we did a Wes Montgomery one, a Larry Young one,
Okay.
a Shirley Horn one, a Thad and Mel big band one, and a Stan Getz one. And so it was 5 nights, and Zev stood up and did a talk before each one, and he brought a whole bunch of products, sold a ton of product, and so that really started a friendship. And
Okay.
I said, "Yeah, man, I'd really like to get into this. This seems cool." And I don't think he took me super seriously at first because we didn't really know each other. But he said, "Oh, you play alto. I got these Cannonball tapes," and I was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, back up! What?
Yeah.
You got what?"
No kidding. Yeah.
So over the course of several emails and phone calls, and at that time he was pretty much solely working with Resonance Records, of which he's the president of. And Resonance decided they weren't going to do anything with the Cannonball tapes. So, and they come from Seattle, and I had a relationship with Jim Wilkie. But Zev also talked to me about he's the custodian of the Left Bank Jazz Society tapes. And Left Bank was a society that existed in the 60s and 70s. Actually, I think it still exists, but they used to put on all kinds of concerts. Guys would come down from New York on a Sunday afternoon. So, anyways, that's how we came across the Etta Jones, which I fell in love with. So those 2 releases came out, and as you can imagine, they're very expensive. They come out on vinyl, 180-gram vinyl, double in some cases. I got some people together and got a couple of investors together. We got a couple of grants, and we did those 2. And then we followed it up. I think Lockjaw was the third one.
Mhm.
And then we followed it up with George Coleman. Um, and then we did a reissue of 49th Parallel, which is a Neil Swainson record.
Swenson, yeah.
And as those started to come out, what started to happen is I started to get, well, first of all, I started to get a lot more options from Zev because he sort of realized that we were serious.
Mhm.
I'd blow your mind if I show you what I have on my hard drive. Um,
I was gonna ask.
and so so the procedure is you run a profit and loss on all those, and then you make a decision. Um, but what also started happening is I started getting calls from people. Oh, hey, I got these tapes, and some I involve Zev in, some I don't. And then we did the Harold Land with Zev. We did the Roy Brooks with Zev, and then we did the Pepper Adams, which comes from a Canadian archive.
Yeah, from
Um,
like Edmonton, is that
yeah,
right?
from Edmonton. Sorry, I got a itchy nose. Yeah, and so, um, yeah, so I got stuff coming at me from every angle in terms of available stuff in which to do things with. As I said, it's very expensive, and it can
Mhm.
be the research process can be very exhausting because first of all, you have to clear everything with the estates of each musician,
Sure.
and most of them
Right.
are dead. And in many cases, you can't find them. So in the instances where you can't find these musicians, you proceed accordingly, and you hold that money in trust in case they ever come out of the woodwork and say, "Hey, like we saw this release, you didn't
Right.
pay me." They say, "Okay, well, we got a favored nations agreement with the whole band. Here's the $1,000 or whatever it is."
Mhm.
Excuse me. So essentially, that's how it works. It's a long process. It's an exhaustive process. We have next April. We don't have anything coming out in November.
Okay.
Um, but in April we have a Shirley Scott recording coming out from the
Oh,
left
awesome.
bank, and a Walter Bishop with Harold Vick recording coming also from the left bank. And then the following November we're working on a Shelly Manne release with Frank Stroziers on one side,
Really?
and
Okay.
yep, and
Awesome.
Herb Geller on the other side, and we have a Jack McDuff recording from Seattle. So that kind of takes us up. Like that's we have other stuff, but that's the stuff that we've cleared, and so that's the stuff that we're focused on, and that takes us to a year from now, a year and a bit from now. So, um, yeah, so it's fun. It's fun. It requires a lot of patience. But I mean, when you get I don't know if I have an open one, but when you get we sort of go the opposite way of actually this is not a good one. We go the opposite way of like what they're doing in the industry. So, like if you see this Harold Lamb, like, it's a double, it's a double gatefold, with
Yeah.
photos, and then
Like it used to be, like it
yeah,
was.
exactly. And
Yeah.
there's a extensive booklet. Like this
Yeah.
is like it's like 8 pages with all kind with photos and
Yeah, you're not messing around. It's the
no. So and that's Zev Feldman. That's Zev
okay.
is that's his jam. I mean even I don't want to speak for Zev, but we've had to adjust. How we get these things out too. Like we're considering some CD only things. We've even considered some digital only things. So this industry is no different. Like when you press 2000, like this Shirley Scott and Walter Bishop, I mean, man, we're pressing 300 CDs. Like that's, excuse me, 300, 3,000 LPs, double LPs. I mean,
Um,
the manufacturing bill on that alone is about $32,000. So,
um,
it's a big chunk of money. So you got to be really sure, because if you make a wrong decision, I mean, it can really, like, it could put you out of business essentially. Um, so you got to be really, yeah, you got to be really careful. But it's really fun. It's very,
that,
very fun.
that's amazing. Actually, in your answer, you hit basically all my follow-up questions
Oh,
to that.
okay.
But it's that's interesting. And then the last thing I was going to ask you, you have anything coming up, or is it top secret? But yeah, Shirley Scott and well, a whole
Yeah, I
pile
mean,
of them.
generally, so these records that we do, these records that we put out are, the model is around Record Store Day. And for those that don't know what Record Store Day is, it's a day that happens twice a year. The official Record Store Day is in April. It's usually the third week of April, and then they kind of have a secondary one attached to Black Friday.
Okay. Yeah.
And so essentially, the goal is to ship these sold out. So
I
we send
see.
them all to our distributor. They all get ordered and they all get bought, and you're done.
Okay.
So, I mean, I hold some back to sell to people who can't get them or whatever. But so that's the model. So it's not the traditional model where you put it out and then you have to wait. Like you get some money now and then some money next month. No, it's like you put it out and then 3 months later you get a big ass check
Okay.
and you're done.
That's
So
cool.
yeah, yeah. So it's really fun. I mean, if the worst thing that comes out of it is just all the stuff, like Zev and I have a very good relationship, and he trusts me. So whenever I get an email in my box from him, he's like, "Check this out, top secret." I'm like, "Oh God, here we go." And and I'm mad at him. It's like, "Yeah, it's so great." Like I can say this now because he's announced it, but I heard that Elvin Jones stuff. I don't know if you saw it on Facebook, but there's an
No.
Elvin Jones recording coming out. I can't remember what year, 66. And I actually did some of the editing work on that, but I knew about that recording like 2.5 years ago,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's finally coming to fruition. So, there's a lot of shit that has to happen for this stuff to make it into the world, and there's some risks you have to take, um, as well, calculated risks around what you put out and what you don't put out. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Very cool. So then, when I initially reached, look, you mentioned it yourself. Myself, I'm a huge Hank Mobley fan, right? I mean,
Mm,
if I can't list a personal favorite, but in terms of the way I play, like, I mean, so much of my vocabulary comes from him,
me
and
too.
all these things, and like, even, you said your wall of CDs. I have a stack of Mobley CDs on my CD player that never go back
Yeah.
into the case because they're
Yeah, yeah,
always
yeah,
going in
yeah.
and out of the machine. So I initially reached out to you because this Mobley video surfaced,
Yeah.
and up until very recently, there was no known footage of Mobley. And I
Yeah.
even did on my channel, I did a video of my top 10 favorite players where I present a video clip. I talk about why I like them, how they've influenced me, so my audience can get to know my tastes a bit, where I'm coming
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, this Mobley video pops up, right? He's playing "Summertime." I'm like, what the heck is this? Where did this come from? And then, of course, I see Cory Weeds. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
well, the odds are Cory might have something to do with it. Is this part of Reel to Reel? Can you tell me anything
No.
about how this happened?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I can tell you what happened. So I got a call from a friend, who shall remain nameless by choice,
Hmm.
saying, "Hey man, I've got this video. Let me send it to you. What do you think?" I'm like, "Oh my God, this is like the holy grail of
Yeah.
everything." And so, my first thought is, how can you monetize it? And, and what would go into monetizing it? And, you know, I I thought about it. I talked to a few people like Michael Kuskuna, and it's like there's not much you can do, unless you find more material. And I also knew if I had this video that probably somebody else had it too, because it's not my video. So it's only a
Right.
matter of time before I got it. So I went back and forth with telling him what he should do with it. And then he said, "Well, do you want to put it out?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I mean, of course I do, because everybody's going to think I'm a hero."
You
But I mean,
are, yeah.
I'm like, because I said to him, "Are you prepared for the shit that's going to happen?" And he's like, "Nah, I don't want to deal with it." He's a quiet guy. And I'm like, "Okay, I'll put it out." So I did. And I don't know if it's the right decision. I mean, I can tell you my YouTube subscriber thing shot through the roof.
I bet.
Um, and I don't really know what that means long term, but I mean, I didn't really do it. I mean, I'm a businessman, so obviously my first choice is always, hey, how can I monetize this? How can I turn this into something financial?
Mhm.
Um, and it just wasn't going to work, so I put it out, and I don't regret putting it out. People have been very grateful. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, it's just kind of, it's just out there. It was from a guy. And what happened was, there's a guy in the Ukraine, a jazz researcher, and why I got turned on to this guy was because, he's in the Ukraine and everybody wants to help the Ukraine. And so the guy said, my friend sends me, hey, like, he'll send you his list of videos, and if you want to buy some, he gives you a great rate, and you're helping him out because he's in the Ukraine and they're getting,
Yeah, they're
literally getting killed over there.
bombed, yeah.
So that's what ended up happening. So you see his name on my post or his email. He's the
Yeah.
researcher. He's the guy that found it. I just got the credit for posting it. So I felt it felt a little cheap. I felt a little dirty or cheap. I was like, ah.
No,
But I
but
mean, I just felt like, and I couched it. I mean, you saw my post. It was like, look, with all the darkness happening in the world, I think this will probably cheer a lot of people up. And it did. The response to it was really cool. Um, so no, it has nothing to do with Reel to Reel. I didn't really have anything to do with the, um, I didn't really have anything to do with the researching of it, or it was just, it kind of landed in my lap. My friend didn't want all the attention. He knows I like attention, so I was like, let's do it, so that's how that came about.
Well, I
And
mean, kudos.
video
Sorry.
is a hard thing to monetize. That's one thing that's a little bit difficult to monetize, so whatever.
Well, kudos to you for putting it out though, because it's like, I think people need to see this stuff. And I mean, I don't want to spend much time on this, but I do like all this stuff is coming out of Europe. It seems in
Yeah,
particular,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
all Dutch people, and like I don't know. I mean, thankfully they were there recording all these people because it seems like the Americans didn't even give a you know didn't care about their own art form enough unless it was like Train or something,
It is kind of funny,
and
isn't it?
then and I'm wondering what was going on like in Copenhagen. Did they just like did everyone get a video camera so they felt compelled to record this stuff, or did they just
Yeah, I know. I
realize?
mean, I know that was for a TV show, that I know. And I can't remember the name of it. I thought I might have put it in the post. I can't remember, but it was definitely for a TV show because there's some Dexter video that
Yeah.
I actually might
Okay.
post too. There's a really cool Dexter video with a bunch of kids, and then there's a dollar brand video that's also
Dollar
very
Round?
cool. Yeah, Abdullah Ibrahim.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah,
very cool.
that's very cool too. So yeah, so.
Well, I look forward to it. Um, Look, I've taken a lot of your time, but can I ask you a few saxophone
Sure,
related
of
questions before we
course.
go?
Yeah,
Okay. So the Saxophone Oracle channel that I started about a year and a half ago, the purpose here is to help people become better sax players, better improvisers. So you being a fantastic saxophone player, do you have one or two things you could share with my subscribers, either exercises you do or things that really made a difference in your playing, maybe a story of like a life-changing lesson or any kind of advice on the playing side?
yeah. I guess I can share a couple of things. First of all, um, I think what helps me and what centers me the most, and I know this probably is an unpopular thing, and my friend Steve Caldestad, who's my favorite
Yeah,
saxophone
Steve,
player,
sure. I remember him in
um,
Montreal.
yeah, he said, long tones, man.
Yeah.
You play faster if you do long tones. You play better if you do long tones. And I never believed him. I'm like, come on, man. I only got like 30 minutes in a day. Like I got to get all my shit in there. And I find when I just sit and do long tones for 20 minutes, it just opens everything up for me. It opens up my ears. It relaxes my fingers, and I start thinking about things a little bit differently when I do that. So that's a big thing that I do now, a lot of, if I can only do one thing. Um, I'm a big believer in transposition. I mean, I'm not one of those guys that has a big thick book of the thousands of solos I've transcribed, but
Oh,
t
transcription, yeah.
yeah, taking certain things in those transcriptions that you like for young players, like taking the really obvious licks that like everybody plays, and like getting those on your fingers because they're important. And I still play them today, the cliches, but taking things that maybe are a little different, things that you haven't heard before over those same sequences. And it's hard to do because our ear wants to play and go to what's comfortable, and it wants to push away what's not comfortable.
Hmm.
And I know for me, I have to work really hard when I hear something, especially if it's like from a modern player, and I'm like, well, I've never heard Hank do that, so forget it. But it's like the reason I'm saying that is because it's not, I don't understand the theory behind it, and it's foreign to my ears. So I've been finding lately that when I go back to that kind of line of thinking and play some stuff that's not easy for you or that's not natural for you, transcribe that and try to get some of that stuff under your fingers.
Okay.
um that's something. And then this is something, as I'm sure you deal with because you're a musician, I think a lot about the mental side of music, and you know, I'm really willing to be open and say, say that I struggle with the mental side of music. Why do I get these gigs? I don't deserve these gigs. Everybody's better than me. All that stupid stuff. And what really,
Comparisons and all.
yeah, and can never like I just concentrate when I'm on stage playing, have a good sound, which you'll get from long tones, and just be musical. It's not about I find now if I go listen to a saxophone player and I just like I'm yeah, sorry, I'm done. I understand you can do that, but can you tell me something? And so whenever I'm doing a gig, I just always try to think, just be musical. Just be musical. I think about Scott Hamilton. I think
Yeah.
about I think about Lester Young. I think about like all those people that Dexter even,
Yeah.
to a lesser extent, that just relied so much on feel and the right notes, not a lot of notes. So I don't know, I'm not that's one of the reasons, Cameron, that I don't teach. I don't really feel like I have a my method for my own thing is just like what I'm dealing with today. I mean, I did all the same things you did and everybody else, like practice all my scales and all my patterns and learn a bunch of tunes and transcribed a bunch of stuff, but I don't remember pivotal moments necessarily, but most of what I think about now when people ask me about the saxophone is like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing now that's working for me? Because as you know, like this is a journey that will never end. We're
Absolutely.
never gonna be like, wow, okay, I'm really burning now. I can stop. Like, I have to deal with this all the time because as we've alluded to in the last hour, like I'm doing a lot of stuff. Like
Mhm.
my saxophone's sitting right there, but I may not get to it today. And I have 3 gigs next week, and I'm like, okay, well, you didn't sit there and work out all your patterns. So what do you got today? Like, what? And the only thing I can do in those moments is just be musical, man.
Yep.
Just be musical. Play less.
Yeah.
Play less. Just play less.
Well
And
said.
9 times out of 10, that really works for me. Once in a while it doesn't work. And I've also learned too that sometimes I think there is something to be said for pushing through when you're struggling practicing, because I think we want to sound good in the practice room. And really, in the practice room, you want to sound bad because that means you're actually working on something. But I also think there's as much merit in knowing when it's not your day and putting the saxophone down and
Yeah. Okay.
just walking away and be, you know what, today's not the day. I'm
Hmm.
not saying give up because you can't get a pattern but I mean, I know when I pick up my horn after 5 minutes, I just be like, you know what, it's not the day today. Yeah, it's not going to work today. Just put it down. Like it's going to be there tomorrow. And no, you're not Eric Alexander, and I'm not Grant Stewart, and I'm not these people, but I'm Corry, and I sound good, and I can play. And I can tell you this wasn't a teaching thing, but one of the greatest compliments I ever received was I was just telling the story the other day. I'm glad I remembered it. I was at Smoke, which to me is the holy grail. I haven't been to the new one, but back then, like that was my hang. Everybody was going to the Vanguard, and I'm like, no, I'm going to Smoke every night. All my people are there.
Hmm.
So Harold Mayburn is playing, and I'm there with my tour group. And I had had a few drinks because I wasn't going to play, but I had my horn because I was sitting in at the gig before. Anyways, Mayburn asked me to sit in, and I said no. And Mayburn was very mad at me. He was very insulted.
Okay.
So
Wow.
I sat at the bar and had another drink at the front of the bar. He gets on the mic and Matt, I'm gonna bring up big friend Vancouver Canada. His name's Cory Weeds. He's gonna come up play some tenor saxophone. And I'm like, I'm 3 beer in. I'm like,
Hmm.
Jesus, and it's Eric.
Yeah.
I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
Weber and Farnsworth. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So
Heavy, heavy.
I get my horn out and I played a blues. And I'm like, okay, actually, this is yeah, I sounded good. I'm like, I hung with Eric. I didn't sound like Eric, but I hung with him. Then they said, Cory, ballad feature, and Eric just leaves the stage. I'm like, what? So I played a ballad. So at the end of the set, I'm sitting at the bar. I don't know why I was by myself. Nobody was around me. I was just sitting at the bar, and I have to swear when I say this. I hope that's okay. You can edit it out. But
I'll edit it.
Eric comes up behind me and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he's like, you know what, Weeds?
Kenny G here.
You and all your musical shit. And he walked away, and it took me a minute. I'm like, wait a minute. I think he just paid me like an incredible compliment because
Absolutely.
Eric is like just like
Yeah.
machine gun sax. I'm not saying he's not musical, but it's a different kind. He's just up there like wow, and
Yeah.
I'm like I can't compete with that. Like I'm not even gonna try. First of all,
Yeah.
I can't play that fast. I don't have the vocabulary to even play that much shit.
Hmm.
So I'm just gonna be musical. And he noticed and he came over and was just like, yeah, screw you. Like, trying to show me up being all musical. And I was like, okay, so it works. It works. It works. So,
It's interesting. I used to hear a story. I don't know who told me the story, but I heard with Gene Ammons and Sonny Stitt, it used to drive Stitt nuts that he would like lay down all the stuff and Ammons would just go brrr, and the crowd
yeah,
would go wild.
it go nuts. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, Gene is a perfect example. I mean, you listen to Gene's records and you're like, there is nothing he's playing that I can't play. But why does it sound so
Yeah, why does it
good?
sound so good? Yeah.
It's like, damn, I'm like, I'm gonna try to play like 3 notes in the first 8 bars, and it's like it sounds like shit. Yeah,
Well, you know what? That's sage advice. There's a lot of good words of wisdom in there. And I appreciate it. And I hope everyone else does who's watching. Last thing I want to do with you, I know you're very busy. Would it be okay? I thought it would be fun to ask you a series of rapid fire questions.
sure.
So I'm going to go down like 10 of them, no elaborate answers. First thing that comes to mind, nothing right, nothing
Okay,
wrong. Is that all cool?
go ahead.
All right. What's the last thing you listened to?
Shirley Scott archival release that we have upcoming.
All right. What's your favorite brand of saxophone?
Con.
All right. What setup do you currently play on tenor and alto?
I have a Con 10M tenor. I play a Matt Morantz double ring copy, which is like an auto link copy. Regular ligature. Um, D'Addario 2 medium reeds.
Okay.
Alto, I have a Selmer balance, super balance action, 1939. I think it's super balance. I play a Matt Morantz hard rubber alto piece, 2 medium, and I play a Ishimori ligature on alto.
Thanks. Next, when it comes to being a great saxophone player, what it takes to becoming a great saxophone player, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important do you think is gear?
Well, 4.
All right. What percentage of our practice time do you think should be spent playing slowly?
Ooh. 75.
75. I'll take it. How long would you say it took you to become a somewhat competent saxophonist?
Wow. Well, let's see. How long have I been playing? I mean, somewhat competent, I would say like 5 years.
5 years? Okay,
Yeah,
I'll take it.
yeah, 5 years.
Perfect. When you started getting serious about music, how many hours a day did you practice?
Oh man, probably 4 or 5. I've never been a big practicer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say 4 or 5.
All right. When can we expect your next recording, the next Cory Weeds recording?
The next recording will be. It was going to be recorded in December, but it looks like it's been delayed till February, so it'll probably come out like 1 year from now, September 2023.
Okay, perfect. Who is your favorite younger player on the scene today? So someone say 40 years and younger.
Ooh, 40 and younger.
Yeah.
Damn. I really like Sam Dillon.
Okay.
Sam Dillon's a very good saxophone player. I like Sam a lot.
All right, last question. Please spell Kazakhstan for me.
K. Shit. Wow. That's a good question. I'm gonna screw it up maybe in the first 2 letters. Okay, Kazakh
Very close, very close. I'll
Really?
take it. I'll take it. Yeah, Kazakhstan.
Okay, I put the C. That C. Sometimes there's a C
Yeah, yeah.
in there. Oh, that's funny.
I love it though. Thanks for being a good sport.
No problem.
Cory, thank you again. Thank you for taking the time.
Anytime, man. I love talking about this stuff. So anytime, I really do enjoy it.
All right. I hope we can do it again soon.